How far does Israel want to go? What does it really want in Gaza? And above all, what on earth is Netanyahu up to exactly? In recent days, we have all been witnessing, and most likely also throwing up our hands in horror, an absolutely brutal level of destruction in the city of Gaza. Almost 2 years have passed since the terrible events of October 7, and the missiles just keep falling. To the point that we're no longer talking about damaged buildings, but practically an entire city reduced to dust, ruins, and ashes. This time, the Israeli government has made it particularly clear.
Israel threatens to destroy Gaza if Hamas does not accept its conditions for an agreement.
And since Hamas has not surrendered, that is exactly what they are doing.
The Israeli army warns Gaza residents of an unprecedented attack.
The problem, of course, is that Hamas members are not the only ones in Gaza. There are more than 2 million people living in inhumane conditions. Without going any further, at this very moment, more than 500,000 Palestinians, according to Israel's own figures, are walking to nowhere in particular through the narrow evacuation routes that leave the city of Gaza. An enclave with thousands of years of history that until recently was considered the largest city in all of Palestine, and which these days, as I said, is being reduced to ashes. VisualPolitik community, international condemnation is mounting, indignation is growing, protests are continuing, and more politicians are speaking out in outrage. Following the 7th of October 2023, Israel was given international solidarity and support, but that is something that is now rapidly fading. And so the question is, what exactly is Netanyahu up to? How far does he want to go? Here on VisualPolitik, we said quite some time ago that we didn't share Benjamin Netanyahu's no way out vision. That not having a clear plan to end the war would end up being catastrophic, and that's exactly what we're seeing. That's why with this video we want to better understand what on earth is going on and what might happen next, because logically we're not here on VisualPolitik just to repeat what everyone else is saying, but to try and see beyond that, whether it's controversial or not, so that you can then draw your own conclusions. That is now, and always has been, our main objective. That's why we're going to analyse the 5 key points that will allow you to understand everything that is happening, and at the end, we'll give you our opinion. Let's begin. International pressure against Israel continues to grow. Last Sunday, for instance, Netanyahu's government suffered a severe blow. The United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and Portugal officially recognized the Palestinian state. What does this mean? Basically, that these countries are fully committed to the two-state solution, and most importantly, that they formally and publicly recognize Palestinian territory. This would officially mean that any annexation by Israel would be automatically condemned. Keep this idea in mind, because as we will see, it will be crucial throughout this story. Be that as it may, they aren't the first countries to do so. In fact, a total of almost 150 countries have already recognized Palestine. But the United Kingdom and Canada have been the first G7 countries to formalize this significant political step.
Today, we join over 150 countries who recognize a Palestinian state also. A pledge to the Palestinian and Israeli people that there can be a better future.
Netanyahu's response? Categorical. There will be no Palestinian state. That will not happen.
יש לי מסר ברור לאותם מנהיגים שמכירים במדינה פלסטינית לאחר הטבח הנורא ב7 באוקטובר. אתם מעניקים פרס עצום לטרור. ויש לי מסר נוסף עבורכם. זה לא יהיה. לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית ממערב לירדן. המענה לניסיון האחרון לכפות עלינו מדינת טרור בלב ארצנו, המענה הזה יינתן לאחר שובי מארצות הברית.
And, of course, given how things are going, that statement does not seem particularly gratuitous. Without going any further, this past Sunday, tanks from the 36th Division of the Israeli army already entered the city of Gaza. In other words, it's no longer just soldiers and advanced groups. Now, the heavy machinery is on the ground. But okay, so far, nothing new. The war continues, Israel shows no mercy, and everything is getting out of hand. Now, to really understand what is happening, and what may happen, we need to consider 5 key points. Pay attention. Merkava tanks, artillery, air force, demolition teams. Israel is going all out, to the point that nearly 70% of the buildings in Gaza have either been destroyed or are seriously damaged. 70%. And yet, the war is still not over. The question is, Why not? Well, it's true that there are still hostages in the hands of Hamas, just as it's also true that Israel has already neutralized the vast majority of this terrorist organization. There's little doubt that Hamas has already lost most of its militants, its centers of operations, and its weapon depots. And yet the war continues. Even when the Trump administration was on the verge of reaching an agreement with Hamas, Israel derailed it. And naturally, many now believe that this new massive military operation, if it's going to do anything, it will be to endanger the lives of the hostages who are still alive. And not only that, the army itself has been very clear. After 2 years of war, the armed forces are beginning to be under a lot of strain. But then, let me repeat the question. What on earth is Netanyahu looking for? Well, nothing less than turning Gaza into Swiss cheese, just like the West Bank. And what would this Swiss cheese consist of? Well, dividing the Gaza Strip into sections, including establishing a security zone in what has until now been Gaza City. In other words, turning a city of almost 700,000 inhabitants into a security zone that would keep any paramilitary operations, such as rocket launches, away from populated areas of Israel. Crazy, but true. The problem: this would require a huge deployment of troops, with a completely disproportionate human, military, and financial cost. Not to mention the humanitarian drama, expelling hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people from their homes and condemning them to a life of hardship and tents. But whatever the outcome may be, this explained why tanks are once again rolling in, and why we're witnessing the evacuation of the largest city in the Strip. Because everything indicates that this is no longer about defeating Hamas, but about turning this territory into a permanently controlled space. Clearly, the international community has picked up on these intentions, which is why countries such as France are promoting an initiative to establish an international mission in Gaza to take care of security and restore order. This is an option that Netanyahu wants absolutely nothing to do with. Why not? Well, to understand this, we have to take into account the second key factor behind everything we are witnessing. Pay attention. Okay, a moment ago, we told you that the United Kingdom has officially recognized the Palestinian state. In other words, they have recognized that Palestine is clearly a sovereign country, but that's not all. To understand why this is so important, we have to take into account something else that London has done recently, condemning the plan to expand Jewish settlements near East Jerusalem, in what is known as the E1 area. And pay attention, because here we come to a crucial issue. Area E1 is a 12-kilometer squared zone that is still considered part of the Palestinian territories, but is basically under Israeli control. The issue is that this corridor is key to the viability of a Palestinian state. Why? Because this space is a vital passageway between the north and south of the West Bank. So if Israel annexes and fully urbanizes this land, as it intends to do, then the connection between the northern West Bank and the southern West Bank would be completely cut. Given the terrain, traveling from Ramallah to Bethlehem, for example, would become an almost endless journey. You would have to cross the Judean desert, descend into the Jordan Valley, and then climb back up again, which would involve first descending about 1,200 meters and then climbing an equivalent distance in a single trip. Unfeasible. And not only that, East Jerusalem, the area that was supposed to be the Palestinian capital, would also be disconnected from the rest of the West Bank. The result? A Swiss cheese with holes even bigger than the ones we've seen so far. Another blow to the viability of a Palestinian state. Do you know what? Israel's plans go further. They plan to build more than 3,500 homes, a large shopping center, offices, business parks, a whole wall for the future of Palestine, erected on territory that the Oslo Accords considered Palestinian. But hold on a minute, because it's not just about this space. In fact, this isn't even the most important thing. Take a look at what the Canadian Prime Minister has to say, for instance.
The current Israeli government is working methodically to prevent the prospect of a Palestinian state from ever being established. It has pursued an unrelenting policy of settlement expansion in the West Bank.
He has plenty of reasons to say this. For example, on September the 3rd, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, a religious Zionist, presented a plan for Israel to annex more than 80% of the West Bank.
Smotrich proposes annexing 82% of the West Bank in an attempt to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. It is time to apply Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and eliminate once and for all the idea of dividing our small land and establishing a terrorist state in its heart.
Smotrich's plan is to absorb the vast majority of the West Bank, leaving only 6 Palestinian population centers inside it as completely isolated islands. Those 6 islands would be Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, Tulkarm, Jericho, and Hebron, perhaps the most tense spot in the entire West Bank. 6 isolated cities surrounded by territory that would become Israel, with all that implies. Checkpoints, security, the need for permits to move between zones, and so on and so forth. Obviously, that would never be a viable state, which is basically what the religious Zionists and even Netanyahu himself want. And keep in mind, it's not us saying this, they are saying it themselves. Take a look.
There will never be a Palestinian state. This place is ours. We will safeguard our heritage, our land, and our security.
And trust me, these are not empty words. While the war in Gaza has dominated the headlines, Israel's operations in the West Bank have also skyrocketed. The IDF has even entered with tanks and occupied the Jenin refugee camp, which until recently was the cradle of Palestinian resistance. And not only that, during this time, Israel has also installed hundreds of new checkpoints, established new closed areas, suspended more than 100,000 work permits for Palestinian workers in Israel, and reduced the autonomy of the Palestinian Authority to critical levels not seen in a very long time. They are even withholding payments for customs duties that Israel collects on behalf of Palestine, according to the agreements signed. This has meant that the Palestinian National Authority is frequently unable to pay the salaries of government employees. The result, it's estimated that these measures have reduced the Palestinian economy by more than 30%. Another severe blow to the development of a possible state. In this VisualPolitik community, we are taking many steps backwards.
This is a much cheaper war than the one they are waging in Gaza. By destroying our financial system, they will suffocate our economy and then bring down our government. Israel is destroying the entire apparatus of the government and the Palestinian Authority.
Let me stress, these are not just rumors from one side. The government is saying it loud and clear. They will not allow a Palestinian state to be created. This means overturning all the agreements and international political discourse of recent decades. The main problem, without the two-state solution, there seems to be no path to peace. It's that simple and that stark. This plan would leave millions of people without political rights or the possibility of development under a framework that would be very reminiscent of apartheid. It is neither viable nor acceptable nor an option for the future. But that's not all. It would also automatically lead to the severing of bridges and ties with Arab countries.
Annexation would be a red line for my government, and that means there can be no lasting peace. It would foreclose the idea of regional integration.
Now, to what extent do Netanyahu and his government intend to carry out this territorial expansion? Well, alarm bells rang in mid-August when, in an interview on an Israeli channel, Netanyahu said he shared and identified with the idea of Greater Israel. This concept is supported by religious Zionists who argue that Israel must claim the occupied West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and parts of Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and Jordan as its own territory. The reason? To assert their historical rights in order to gain security. Well, the thing is that when Netanyahu said on television that he shared the concept of Greater Israel, Arab countries automatically condemned his words in no uncertain terms.
These statements constitute a direct threat to Arab national security, the sovereignty of states, and regional and international peace and security.
And it appears Egypt is the country that is taking this whole story most seriously. Take a look. Benjamin Netanyahu has even asked the White House, through Marco Rubio, to pressure Egypt to reverse the growing militarization of the Sinai Peninsula. According to Israel, Egypt is carrying out activities in this territory that constitute a flagrant violation of the 1979 peace agreements. This is no joke. The Israeli government is accusing Egypt of deploying military capabilities in an area of Sinai where, according to the peace agreements, only light weapons are allowed. And we're not talking about a couple of platoons, but rather, according to Jerusalem, the deployment of some 40,000 troops. But that's not all. Israel also claims that the Egyptians have expanded airstrips in this territory so that fighter jets can operate, and that they've built underground facilities, which, according to Israeli intelligence, could be used in the future to store missiles. Missiles that, if necessary, could be used against Israel itself. And there's more. On the 15th of September, following Israel's attack on Qatari territory, an emergency meeting of Arab countries was held in Doha. At this summit, Egyptian President President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi broke ranks. He suddenly intensified his rhetoric against Israel, and for the first time since taking office in 2014, described the Jewish state as an enemy.
This act of aggression irrefutably demonstrates that Israel's actions have abandoned all political or military logic and have blatantly crossed all red lines. Israel's unbridled recklessness and growing arrogance require us, as leaders of the Arab and Islamic world, to act collectively. Ultimately, our positions must change the enemy's perception of us.
Take note of this. But what the hell is all this about now? Israel and Egypt have been at peace for more than 40 years. Why is this apparent train wreck happening again now? Well, it seems that all this has to do with Gaza, or rather, the Gazan population. On the one hand, Egyptians are increasingly concerned that Israel really wants to expel hundreds of thousands, or even 2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. If you remember, that was the plan Donald Trump proposed not long ago. And where would these people be expelled to? Exactly. To Egypt, an option that this country doesn't even want to imagine. Among other reasons, because that would pave the way for the conflict to spread sooner or later to Egypt itself. Now, this is a possibility that under normal circumstances would seem completely far-fetched, but clearly, after everything we've seen, well, what do you want me to say? The Egyptians fear that this is where things are headed. And not only that, for some time, Israel has also been warning that it will attack Hamas members wherever they are, which is precisely what it did in Qatar. Well, Egypt fears that this will happen on its territory, among other things, because allowing it to happen would probably spell the end of the Egyptian government. And all that without mentioning the idea of a greater Israel, which has been repeated over and over lately, and an idea with which Netanyahu himself now says he identifies. Conclusion: to prevent this, Egypt is militarizing the Sinai Peninsula to deter Israel from both expelling the Palestinians and attacking Egypt. Of course, don't think that Netanyahu is sitting idly by. As well as asking Washington to force Egypt to back down, they are now also threatening to suspend a very important gas export agreement signed very recently with the aim of supplying Egypt with 20% of its total gas consumption. We're talking about an agreement to sell 130 billion cubic meters of gas until 2040, valued at around $35 billion. And even though this agreement is a huge coup for Israel, Netanyahu is now putting pressure on it because it is practically essential for Egypt. Basically, because the gas that will reach them by pipeline from Israel is much cheaper than any LNG alternative. In other words, the Israeli Prime Minister is going all out. The problem is that he may be going too far, and the fact that relations between Israel and Egypt are close to blowing up again is good evidence of this. We'll have to keep a close eye on everything that is happening on this front. But let's move on. It appears Netanyahu pushes on with his offensive without caring at all about any dissenting opinions, not even those of the Israeli army itself. However, all this is beginning to take its toll. It's unclear where he wants to take the war, and this has led many of his critics to accuse him of adding fuel to the fire in order to survive politically. Many of the hostages' families accuse the government of not prioritizing their release. Many Israelis are taking to the streets to say that enough is enough, and according to polls, most no longer trust this Prime Minister, although his party, Likud, remains the one with the most voting intention. And all this is happening at home, but outside, an even more rapid change is taking place. Up until recently, Israel had gained a lot of popularity, something it is now losing even in the United States, where the majority already has an unfavorable opinion of Israel, and where the country's popularity is at its lowest level in 25 years. That's not good. We only have to look at what's happening in Europe. Take a look. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Policy, has revealed that the Commission has drawn up a plan to punish Israel and pressure it to end the war. Specifically, we're talking about suspending parts of the association agreement between the European Union and Israel, setting extraordinary tariffs, and imposing sanctions against the religious Zionist ministers in the government. The plan has to be approved by member countries, and for now, it's unclear whether that will happen. But the mere fact that Israel's largest trading partner is considering this option is a sign of the widespread rejection that Netanyahu's actions are generating abroad. VisualPolitik community, Hamas attacked Israel with enormous cruelty. We know that. Hamas is a terrorist group, and Israel is more than justified in attacking them. But that cannot condemn an entire people and more than 2 million civilians. Let me be clear. Here on VisualPolitik, we have argued for Israel's right to defend itself, a country with many strengths, but that can never be a blank check. This time, Netanyahu has gone too far. What is happening in Gaza is unacceptable. We hope this nightmare ends soon. In any case, I hope this video has helped you better understand everything that is happening. That said, the question is, how do you think it will all end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and let's open up the debate. And don't forget to like this video if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take care, see you very soon, cheers.